Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Welcome to Planning and Financing Sustainable and Equitable Cities, Global Views on Land Value Capture. My name is Enrique Silva. I'm the Director of International Initiatives at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy and also the lead for our programs in Africa. It is my real great pleasure to welcome all of you to another session of the Lincoln Dialogues, a space created to reflect on and share our thoughts on past and future work of the Institute and the people and institutions with whom we collaborate. We have created this space as part of the celebration of the 75th anniversary of the Institute. As some of you may know, some of you, if you're visiting us for the first time, the Lincoln Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan private operating foundation based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and with offices in Phoenix, Arizona, Washington, DC, and Beijing, China. As noted, we are currently celebrating our 75th anniversary. The Lincoln Institute began with a simple but powerful idea championed by the political economist Henry George in the late 1800s. And that idea was that by freeing communities from land speculation, governments can unlock opportunities that enable everyone to thrive. Our founder, John C. Lincoln, turned this idea into a living legacy and created what would today become the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy in 1946. Since, we have been working to effect change through better land and water policy and practices, focusing on 6 goals, including functional land markets, fiscally healthy regions and cities, addressing climate change, and reducing poverty and inequality. We conduct and publish research, provide training and technical assistance, and convene leaders and practitioners in the United States and across the globe. Our work focuses on North America, Latin America, Europe, Asia, and with an emerging program in Africa. Today, we will focus on one of the clearest examples of the way our work advances the core idea and inspiration that launched the Institute. Today, we will be talking about land value capture. What is land value capture? Land value capture is a policy approach that enables communities to recover and reinvest land value increases that result from public investment and government actions. When adopted, land value capture signals government's legitimate claim to land value increments on private property associated with public investments and zoning regulations, especially allowances for greater density and intensity of land use on private property. As we will see, land value capture not only offers sustainable ways to finance urban development, but also ways to ensure that the benefits and burdens of urban growth are spread equitably across communities. In many ways, this dialogue in particular has its roots in the history and legacy of our work in Latin America and the Caribbean, which started in earnest about 25 years ago under the leadership of our dear colleague, Martin Spolka. Latin America then and today offered the Institute an opportunity to see, learn, research, and ultimately teach more ways in which land policy and land markets affect the well-being of communities, their environment, and urban development patterns. We were particularly interested in understanding the role land markets and land policies had and continue to have in generating and sustaining informal settlements and urban inequality. The focus turned to the failures of land use regulations, dysfunctional land markets, and weak public sector financing to provide service land at a rate commensurate with the demand for affordable housing. This insight led us to focus on ways governments could tap land and land values as a sustainable source of revenue to help fund infrastructure, housing projects, especially for households in the lower income brackets of society. Over the years, the Lincoln Institute built a body of knowledge and network of researchers and policymakers that highlighted the concept and policy tools associated with land value capture. Through its courses, research, and trainings, the Institute's Latin America program effectively made a 3-part argument on value capture that it continues to make. The first part of the argument is that land value capture should be done. It is a legitimate and clear, good source of revenue to finance critical infrastructure and pay for urban development. Second, that it can be done. Most national constitutions and legal systems allow for some form of land value capture, and its implementation is usually technically feasible. And the third part of the argument is that more land value capture could be done, and it could also be done better. And the trick here is to continuously confront some of the key barriers to land value capture implementation and adoption, primarily ignorance on the concept and its use, ideological differences on its applications, and bureaucratic inertia. Of course, these issues and contexts are not unique to Latin America. This became patently clear in the lead up to Habitat 3, a global United Nations-led summit on human settlements that happens every 20 years. At Habitat 3 in 2016 in Quito, Ecuador, the Lincoln Institute helped to elevate the relevance of land value capture in broader debates on municipal fiscal health and land policy solutions to attend to major urban issues such as spatial inequality, informality, climate adaptation, and affordable housing. The Institute's contribution to Habitat 3 set in motion what would become the Institute's global campaigns on municipal fiscal health and land value capture. These were campaigns meant to elevate and expand our work on the property tax and land value capture and to place them in dialogue with other colleagues and institutions and localities working on land-based approaches to finance urban development. One of the products of this campaign was our first call for research proposals on global approaches to land value capture in 2018. This initiative, in many ways, led us to the partnership with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, which we will hear more about today. As you may suspect, tackling dysfunctional land markets, helping to improve local governments' finances and deploy land value capture is not for the faint of heart, nor is it work that can be done or should be done alone. Land policy is inherently political, and it involves many stakeholders with many interests that can and often be at odds with one another, and which often do not talk or interact with one another. Acknowledging this, the Institute has and will continue to partner with colleagues and institutions from across the globe to help advance good land policy and fiscally healthy communities. Today, we're not just focusing on land value capture, but also the Institute's partners and partnerships that are key to our vision and mission. So without further ado, let's get on with this dialogue. This dialogue is structured around three key questions. First, why are cities paying attention to value capture today? Second, what are some lessons learned or best practices from land value capture across the globe for other cities and localities to learn from? And third, where does the concept of equity fit into the land value capture debate? We will kick off the conversation with our colleague Rudiger Ara. He is the head of Economic Analysis, Data and Statistics Division at the OECD's Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities. He will then be followed by our colleague Barbara Schultz of the German Agency for International Cooperation and GIZ. Their full bios will be offered to you in the chat mode for you to look at, and please do look at them. They are very impressive credentials. Both Rudiger and Barbara will give us an overview of their organization and their interest in land value capture. So before I hand over to Rudiger, a couple of housekeeping items. First, you will all be able to submit questions and answers if you want to answer your own questions in the Q&A tab in your Zoom browser. We will also be using the Zoom chat to share key links and information as background information for this session, including the bios, as I mentioned. And if for whatever reason you're experiencing or seeing technical issues, please let us know through the chat function. And a final point, the session will be recorded and available through the Lincoln Institute's 75th anniversary webpage, which we'll give you a link to as well. So without further ado, please welcome Rudiger and Barbara, and we'll start off with you, Rudiger.
Good evening. I mean, before I start telling you something about the OECD, I would just kind of like, congratulate the Lincoln Institute for its 71st birthday. And just say that, we're having a long-standing history of cooperation with the Lincoln Institute. And I mean, personally, that's one of my preferred cooperation partners. You're always very reliable. You're doing great work. It's been a pleasure to work with you. So, I just wanted to say that before I start. So all the best for your birthday. So I'll just put my screen, which I could have done while I was talking, but somehow sometimes I know why it is not working. That's not good. Okay. Okay, good. Okay, I think you can all see my screen. So basically, I just wanted to start by quickly introducing to you the OECD. Some of you may know the OECD quite well, so I apologize to those. but I have the impression that in the Americas, the OECD is not always that well known. So the OECD is basically, in a way, it's a club of governments, and it is there for international cooperation. It is, as it says, our mission statement, an international organization in which governments work together, that's very important, to find solutions to common challenges, develop global standards, that's also one of the specificities of the OECD, share experiences and identify best practices to promote better policies for better lives. So that's basically our motto, better policies for better lives. And I think that encapsulates quite well what we're doing in the OECD. And I mean, I don't want to be too long about the OECD. We are based in Paris, but just wanted to give you some key numbers, which kind of way gives you an idea of what the OECD is doing. So if you go down, you see we're publishing more than 500 major reports per year. So I mean, there's obviously this production of a think tank that we're having, but we're also a really large conference center for the delegates of the OECD member countries and also selected other countries. You see, we're having 140,000 visitors per year. At least we had before COVID. At the moment, I mean, we're still kind of like a bit frozen, but I mean, as soon as things go back to normal, I mean, we'll be basically back to these kind of numbers. We're having 4,000 conferences per year. As we're saying, we're having, I mean, a really large conference center. It's the largest conference center underground and the safest one in the Paris area. And it's actually quite impressive. So if you happen to be in Paris, I'd encourage you to kind of like drop by and visit the OECD. And obviously you need to, I mean, contact somebody before. You can't just walk in, basically. We're having 37 member countries now. I mean, that number has been continually increasing. It is basically, I mean, in principle, the more developed, I mean, the economies, but I mean, this, I mean, as I was saying, the membership has been steadily increasing, and we're also having now a certain amount of, I mean, emerging economies that are has been joined the OECD and then have now developed basically, I mean, towards higher standards. And I mean, the OECD members, I mean, as we're saying, account for a very large share of world trade and investment and also world GDP. And we're also a very major data provider. So as you can see, we're having more than 5 billion data points that are produced by the OECD. And it's not kind of like big data, you know, where every second you get a new data point. That's all kind of like old-fashioned data. So that's all data that has been is kind of like aggregated out of with a lot of effort from people in the OECD and the OECD member countries. And very importantly, I was talking about earlier about the standard setting function of the OECD. There's more than 450 international standards that have been developed by the OECD. I mean, most of them are not legally binding in the technical sense. It's more like soft law, but I mean, countries are generally adhering to these standards. Works quite well. So I myself, I'm coming from the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions, and Cities. The combining factor of all our work is that we're really focusing on the local aspects. So we're not just looking at the national governments, but we're looking at the local aspects. I mean, they're happening within countries. And on this, I mean, we're working with SMEs, which are very important for regional local development. We are looking at region, cities, and rural areas. We're looking at tourism. So we're having this broad portfolio of activities that we're doing. And within this broad portfolio of activities, we are also having a specific program on the governance of land use, in which we have been, I mean, coming out with a certain number of publications, and where we also, I mean, the Lincoln Institute very much helped us, especially with the launch of the governance of land use and the planning systems in the OECD publication. That was really great at the time. And we're also having a large work stream on subnational finance, having the World Observatory on subnational governance, finance, and investment, and a number of other publications. I mean, I'm just giving you a selection here, basically. Now, why are we interested in land value capture? Why are we interested in governance of land use? I mean, I'm not going to kind of like show you a lot of more charts, but just one, which is basically kind of like shows you the capital stock. I mean, it's just from 6 countries, but I mean, if you look at it globally, I mean, you can very much assume that the, you know, if you don't look at the exact percentage point figure, but if you look at the order of magnitude, this will globally be the same. So basically what you're seeing is that kind of like, I mean, close to 90% of all the capital stock on this planet are either properties or land. I mean, I myself, when I saw this chart, I was very surprised because I had thought that, you know, that kind of like, you know, intellectual property, machinery, equipment, that was really what capital was. But it turns out in reality, no, it's not. I mean, if you're looking at the numbers, capital, basically wealth on this planet, is overwhelmingly property and land. And that means obviously that everything that touches on the value of land or that touches on the value of properties is having a huge impact on the one hand on the distribution side, but it's also potentially a huge source of revenues for financing. So that really just to give you an idea of why we're interested in land value capture. I mean, beyond obviously that, there's a whole host of other reasons. As you all know, there is very important work to be done with the transition to net zero carbon. A lot of that will need to happen in cities. We'll need to build a lot of infrastructure in that process, but we'll also need to build a lot of infrastructure in the process of development in the developing world. And this infrastructure needs to be financed, and finances now after COVID even more than before are stretched. So any ways that basically money can be raised is very welcome, and the land value capture can be a very good tool to raise money for infrastructure, especially in more densely populated areas, which is by and large not used to the degree that it could be. I mean, there are some exceptions where countries have been using it and been raising quite substantial sums of money, but by and large, I mean, most of the potential is being lost, which is even more of a shame in a way, because it's a very fair way of taxing people, because what you're basically doing with land value capture is that you're kind of like, I mean, taxing away benefits that are rising from public intervention, and that are accruing to people who haven't been deserving in a particular way. I mean, they have just been on the right spot in the right moment, basically. And so you're kind of like taking this windfall profit away to finance infrastructure. So from a public goods perspective and from a fairness perspective, I mean, this is a really important and interesting tool. Now, I just wanted to say a couple of words on the compendium that Enrique already mentioned, that we are doing in cooperation with all the people that you're seeing on the screen, basically. And so, I mean, this is, and in the OECD, we are doing that also in cooperation with another part of the house, with the cities division. So with, Senna Chekebechi, which some of you may know, because, I mean, have links to the Lincoln Foundation. And so basically, the compendium we're doing, it really is the idea in a way of having a more systemic approach, a more systematic approach to land value capture, and to understand why in certain places, I mean, large amounts of money can be raised with land value capture, where in other places that really doesn't work. So it really is to have this systematic approach, having the comparison across all the countries, and that is really important. And in this respect, it is important to understand that there basically is a certain literature out there on land value capture, but it mainly is so far it's case studies. And there isn't any international comprehensive database where you can go and kind of like just understand what different countries are doing in different areas. And that is the ambition that we're having for this project. And as somebody else put it, it's basically, I mean, there's a lot of individual cases of success with land value capture, but I mean, we don't know what can be done to make land value capture systematically successful. So what are the challenges and the opportunities of this process? One of the challenges that we have been facing is that a lot of countries are using terms in the land value capture world, but they're meaning different things, basically. And that obviously is a problem, because I mean there cannot be much communication between the different countries. I'll give you an example. For example, when you're looking in Israel, Poland, I mean they have the term of betterment levy, and that basically there means that when land plots are granted development rights, then this betterment levy is the tool they're using and the term for that. When you're looking in the UK or some other countries, a betterment levy, I mean, refers to infrastructure-based settlements and not to development rights betterments like in Israel and Poland. So basically, kind of like, I mean, exactly the same term is used for very different things. So basically, when countries try to talk to each other, there's the problem, obviously, that first the legal systems are different to start with, but then also kind of like, I mean, the vocabulary is not clear. And therefore, one of the things that we've been doing in the process, in a way, I mean, with our partners, we have been developed what we call the OECD Lincoln Institute terminology of land value capture instruments. We're kind of like just very basically defining how we are going to call different land value capture instruments. And that's very important because that is the only way that we can make things comparable on a global level. And also that's the way that is needed, because otherwise experts and governments can't really talk to each other. They're not going to really understand each other. And that has been a great problem so far. Now that, on the other hand, is also one of the big opportunities of the compendium, because I mean, I've been talking about all the things that have not been there so far, and given that they're now being built, I mean, this will enable this dialogue, this will enable a more systematic use of land value capture. This will enable also kind of like, I mean, experts to kind of like help countries to develop land value capture tools better, because I mean they can refer to see what similar countries with similar legal systems are doing, what works there, what doesn't work, and so they can try to kind of like then find solutions that would be well adapted for the local context. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention and give the floor back to Enrique.
Thank you so much, Rudiger, for that that presentation, expanding on the concept of land value capture, emphasizing the amount of value and what land as a resource represents, emphasizing again the point that it's largely an untapped source of value in financing for our communities. And then obviously, thank you so much for introducing this audience to the compendium. And for those, the compendium we're hoping will be published sometime in mid-2022. That's next year, right? Again, we're really very much looking forward to launching it and then seeing how it can be used to further the work that we're doing and the educational and research components. A couple of things that I wanted to mention too. These are, one of them is a shameless plug that I'll make up. So as Rudiger mentioned, the OECD membership grows. One of the more recent members to join, if I'm not wrong, is Colombia. And Colombia just happens to be celebrating the 100th anniversary of its use of betterment contributions, which is one of the key land value capture tools around. And if you're interested in that and it's the history of that tool, please visit our website and look at the events that have been organized. And there's an upcoming event that's going to be co-hosted with by GIZ and OECD, I think next week or the week after on that. So there are plenty of events there and learning opportunities. Without further ado, now I'll pass it over to Barbara and her presentation of her work in GIZ. Barbara, welcome.
Yes, thank you so much, Enrique, and also to Rüdiger. I will try to open my presentation as well and hope everything will work fine. Can you see it already? Yes. Can you see it?
Yep.
Yes, great. Yes, thank you very much for this invitation. Also, all the best from my side for your anniversary. I got in touch with the Lincoln Institute in Colombia. Enrique mentioned this country in the 90s, I think it was, when I was working with an NGO in Bogota, and also for the municipality of Bogota and other municipalities in the country. And working with the Lincoln Institute was really an eye-opener on the strategic value of working on land policies for an equitable and climate-friendly urban development. So very happy to be here. And afterwards, we worked together in Ecuador. So we have already some years working together, and I consider myself like a friend of the house. So very happy to be here. I'm working for GIZ. GIZ is the German agency, state-owned agency for development cooperation. I would like to introduce a bit this organization, because mostly I suppose that many of you don't know the GIZ. GIZ has around, I think, 80,000 employees throughout the world. We are working in around 60 countries in Africa, Latin America, Asia and Southeast Europe, and we're working in the field of technical assistance. This is the organization, as you can see it, with the management board, with the different units, and here you can see where you can find me. We have here the sectoral department and the country departments, Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, etc. And we are, my program is here located in the sector and global programs of Globe. Called Globe. We are working basically on policy advice, technical assistance for bilateral programs, regional programs, and global programs in the field of urban development. We are working for the in this specific unit, sector and global programs. We are working specifically for advising the German government and implementing global projects, and governance is our focus approach, as our section is located in the division Global Policy, Governance, Human Rights and Cities. So this, I'm only a small part of this big institution. The global section cities embraces different programs working on in different fields, projects. These projects cover various fields such as infrastructure financing, smart cities, sustainable building materials, municipal international cooperation, and many more. And my program specifically is the sector program cities, and we are advising directly the unit in charge of urban development in the German Ministry for Development Cooperation. What are we doing? We are working for the ministries, not only for the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, but also for the BMU, which is the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety, and also for the BMI, which is the Federal Ministry of the Interior, Building and Connectivity. And urban development is located in that ministry, so the technical expertise is there. And what are we doing? We're working, as you can see here, on urban climate action and governance and finance. We're working on urban development policies, on municipal international cooperation, and digital governments and smart cities. So our goal is to strengthen the city's climate resilience and the respective infrastructure. We want to empower cities through partnerships and spread digital solutions for smart and inclusive and resilient cities. What does this has to do with land value capture? Why is this interesting for us, specifically working we are as part of this urban community in the development cooperation from Germany? Land value capture is an instrument that expands municipal scope for action, connecting fiscal and planning instruments, and it contains powerful instruments that connect fiscal strategies with urban planning and project preparation. So it goes a bit beyond fiscal or financial revenues, and also encloses aspects that are related strongly with governance and with the technical side of urban planning, and with investments in urban infrastructure and housing. And land value capture offers a huge repertoire of instruments to ensure access to affordable and secure land, adequate housing and neighborhoods for the urban poor. And in the context of climate change, land value capture offers huge possibilities to protect urban and peri-urban ecosystems, allow for implementing green and blue infrastructure, and this kind of things that are really, really very important for sustainable urban development. And this is this is really important for GIZ's urban portfolio because actually around 30% of the technical assistance in general and more than 50% of the financial cooperation from Germany is taking place in cities. The programs are related to decentralization, to municipal service delivery, to infrastructure development, and especially also to water and sanitation. And these are all fields that are connected with infrastructure improvement, with huge investment in this kind of infrastructure. And also with aspects that has to do with redistribution of benefits and with good governance. And land value capture can improve the effectiveness of these programs, improving the financial performance of subnational authorities and fostering equitable and climate-friendly urban development. So this, we see that land value capture contains a kind of approach towards planning and financing urban development, and this allows to be action-oriented, having in mind viability and being pragmatic. Second, to be demand-driven, having in mind the social justice. And third, to be strategic in terms of long-term impact on climate. And in this context, we rely on integrated approaches, making use of synergies and resolving conflicting goals between sectors, spaces, actors, and tiers of government. We rely on innovative institutional solutions for the implementation of urban policies and projects, tackling the technical and financial and political complexity of the task. We rely on facilitating the access to climate financing for urban infrastructure through project preparation facilities, such as the climate finance facilities with C40 and funds like the GAP Fund with the World Bank, as well as the cooperation with global and regional alliances to strengthen the voice of the cities and their access to climate financing. And we know that land value capture is a complex issue, and local policy planners and implementers have to face important challenges. They have to understand mechanisms, their potentials and conditions, and choose the most relevant ones for their own context. Enrique mentioned that in the beginning. They have to cope with these interactions and their consequences and use the tools in a context where they are not well known and political will to implement them is low. So development cooperation, the implementing context of development cooperation is complex too. We have in general, we have to do with administrations, with weak capacities and resources, unclear mandates, insufficient regulatory frameworks, lack of transparency and accountability. We have a huge social pressure that leads to skyrocketing needs for land, public infrastructure and services, with a tendency to firefighting that is counterproductive for sustainable urban development. And we also, in many cases, we have to deal with conflicts of interest and power plays that often lead to disregard of vulnerable groups, forcing the urban poor into informal solutions. So this is our reality of our work in the field of technical assistance for sustainable urban development. But we see that land value capture, independently of the challenges, is a huge possibility. And facing these challenges, the partnership with the Lincoln and also with OECD is so valuable for us, because we think that alone we can't deal with that. We need the capacities and the knowledge of our partners to really enhance this work. And why is this relevant for us in the German Development Cooperation? Our programmatic framework is the implementation of the global development and climate goals. Cities play a key role in this, and I suppose that you know all the numbers. By 2050, 2.5 billion additional people will live in cities. 70% of the GHG emissions are already produced by cities, and this means that we have an enormous demand for improvement and expansion of infrastructure, and thus for investment funds, estimated more than $4 trillion per year globally. So we are talking about a huge demand of investment in infrastructure, and this but this is connected with a need to abandon anti-climate path dependencies. We need to ensure that infrastructure solutions are low carbon and in the sum contribute to climate-friendly urban transformation, including growth. So we have the urban growth. So And on the other hand, we have to ensure that this urban development benefits all city dwellers, and therefore it means to use land value capture to create sustainable alternatives for satisfying the needs of the urban poor, namely 883 million people living today in precarious conditions, and in the future, I think more than 2 billion until 2050, if I'm not wrong. So the challenge is huge, and we need effective approaches to meet current needs, to supply the backlog, and setting the course for future development in terms of climate protection and adaptation. And there is where the partnership with Lincoln enters in the field, because we have to work together on that and to support each other in this fight. And land value capture instruments must be clearly aligned with objectives of the common good. So it's not only talking about financial revenues, it's talking about harmonizing financial and economic efficiency, equal opportunities and social justice, as well as environmental sustainability. And this has to be permanently negotiated and reconciled. So it's not a question only a technical question, and not talking about financing alone. We are putting urban governance and urban management at the center, and cities have a huge convening power to bring together different stakeholders to pay into the same objective, combining their resources and capacities, financial, but also knowledge, communication, and ideas in the best way. So stakeholder involvement is key. Accountability and transparency are key as well. So it's a question of justice, it's a question of effectiveness, and it's a question of climate-friendly solutions for the future of this planet. So with this I would like to hand over again to Enrique.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for really just expanding this even further and kind of really emphasizing the relevance of land value capture on many scales. And one of the things I hope we all appreciate, and something that I clearly appreciate working with both the OECD and GIZ, is that there are two organizations that primarily work with and have a vision that engages with national governments, but they have divisions and a focus on local governments and municipalities, which really gets home the point that healthy national economies and development depend on healthy and sustainable and fiscally healthy local communities, and that within that, land value capture offers one of those tools to ensure that local governments, local communities are healthy, are attending to their communities, are being equitable in the redistribution of the benefits and opportunities of land value capture. I also want to appreciate Barbara's bringing together the land value capture as a fiscal tool, which is the starting point of these conversations, with planning and governance concerns. And I think that's where we see all of this come into action. And that's where we see, as Barbara was suggesting, where the challenges and the opportunities emerge for its use. So now we're going to go into a bit of a dialogue. And I think we've created a concept. We've provided the tableau and so forth. And I think maybe I'm assuming the audience might want some illustrations of some of the major points that you've brought up. So if you don't mind, I'll go back to Rudiger. Rudiger, can you provide an example of a case or country, especially something that's coming out of the compendium, that illustrates some of the points or the uses or good lessons, or maybe the intractable challenges that we're facing, just to give a name and a place to some of the issues that we've talked about?
I mean, I can mention some examples, basically. For example, when looking at Korea and Japan, I mean, you see that land readjustment and expropriation together with effective enabling legal frameworks can successfully fund the development of metros and their surrounding areas. And as examples, you could, for example, look at Singyonyu Station development in Korea. I apologize for my pronunciation. Or you could also look at, in Japan, looking at Misato-chu Station project, which is along the Tsukuba Express. And in that circumstances also was what important that, that there was a flexible approach chosen, and that's certainly highlighted by the case of Korea, where one was using both expropriation and readjustment methods depending on the local circumstances. So one wasn't not only trying to kind of like, fix everything with the same tool, but one was kind of like showing a certain flexibility. And what the case of Japan highlights is that really it is important to negotiate and to build consensus in the land acquisition process, to avoid controversial social tensions and that then typically go into lengthy lawsuits and kind of like drag out your projects forever. I mean, if you look for a country where that's the case, Germany is a perfect example of stuff never getting built because, I mean, there's just, I mean, a very long succession of lawsuits when anything is kind of like supposed to be happening. Then another example that I could mention, but I mean, but maybe I should give the floor to Barbara and then come back. I don't know, Enrique, do you want me to talk a long time or shall I?
well, we've got material, so actually let's go to Barbara and then we can go back. This is a dialogue after all. So thank you. A point. So Barbara, I'm going to focus on and kind of explain a bit how GIZ got involved in the compendium. So the compendium that Rudiger mentioned is a collaboration between the Lincoln Institute and the OECD. And we've gathered, it's based on a survey of, at this age, 61 countries and their applications of land value capture. It would have been fewer than 61 if it had not been for GIZ. GIZ approached us and said, we'd like to participate and contribute to this effort. And they very generously offered resources to add 12 cases, I believe, to the compendium to get us to 61. And their focus was to document cases or document the land value capture practices and legal frameworks that enable it, particularly in countries in what's called now the Global South. Barbara, can you talk a little bit about the countries that you wanted to focus on and any lessons that are coming from there that are informing GIZ and are your thinking or about value capture and the opportunities and challenges that confront us?
Yes, thanks a lot. Yes, we were very happy when we heard from your collaboration and from this initiative to gather this information in a systematic way. We were very, very happy to be part of that and to put our small contribution into to this exercise. And our aim, our idea was to incorporate the countries with which the German corporation is working in the field of urban development. And normally in some cases, these are not the countries that are well known as good examples for urban for urban policies or for sophisticated instruments. But we also know that in these countries we have a huge urban growth that is envisioned for the next 20-30 years. So the demand for new instruments and for a variety of instruments to handle this urban growth is more important than ever. So to mention also only some countries, we incorporated India and Bangladesh. We incorporated, I think, Indonesia, Egypt, some countries in sub-Saharan Africa. I think we incorporated Ethiopia, Namibia as well. And also some more countries in Latin America that were not yet on the list. So this shows maybe a bit our perspective. It's always very, very interesting to see the examples of countries like France or Spain or Japan or even Germany or Canada, how they implement the instruments. But our focus is really on our partner countries in that regions of the world where the most important urban growth is foreseen for the next 20-30 years, and where we have a huge lack of capacities in the subnational governance, but also in the national governments in terms of urban policies. So that was very important for us. Our aim is not only to have this compilation of data, but also about legal frameworks and the instruments and practices. But afterwards, to use this compendium to start with a dialogue with our colleagues and our partners abroad in our partner countries, because the idea is to use this compendium to really start a debate on urban policies, on instruments, on the specific challenges in the countries, but also on the potentials. And we had lastly some conversations with colleagues from Latin America regarding, and from Mexico, from Chile, from Brazil, and from Ecuador as well. And what is always very interesting when you enter a bit more in the details, then you see the huge variety of different contexts, historical contexts, legal contexts, and a lot of potentials, because normally we talk a lot about the challenges and the obstacles, but we also have to sharpen a bit our view also on the potentials to develop like customized and context specific instruments that work well in the different areas, and to be yes, to innovate and to experiment with that. And local governments have a huge potential for that. That's what I learned in Latin America. That's what I learned from Colombia, from Brazil, that in many cases the power is on the local, on the level of the local governments. There is where the ideas are, and in many cases the biggest needs. So that is where the things are happening. And afterwards, if we are lucky, then we can transform it into national policies. So that was our interest. So we are very happy or very keen to see the publication in the next year, and to start with this dialogue. In the case of Latin America, we're already doing it now in November, and we hope very much that next year we can organize an international forum with the colleagues from India. They are very, very interested in this instrument. So that's our motivation to be here.
Thank you so much. And I think one of you made me reflect on one of the things that I'm appreciating with the Compendium project, and the value of documenting such an array of contexts is first and foremost, and especially since we're incorporating countries that are just not only in the OECD but outside of the OECD, and in the global South and the global different corners of the global North, is that this tool, this approach, is not about it's not a developed country tool. In fact, we're getting an appreciation that many wealthier countries actually don't use it at all, or are not leaving. So, and that some other countries in particular, and this is as Barbara was saying, and as we've learned in our work in Latin America, thanks to Martin Smolka's work, is how in some countries, in particular places like Brazil and Colombia, how sophisticated they are at using land value capture and the lessons that they provide. And to demonstrate that these are concepts, these are tools that can be applied, that can be built in contexts where the institutions might not be as robust, the governance institutions, as in other places or in many of the OECD member countries, but it's doable. And I think this is going to allow us to ask sharper questions about the context that facilitates the use and adoption of these practices. The other thing that it also is going to, this compendium is going to help us do, and it's something that we've talked about, and Barbara, you mentioned it as part of the portfolio in GIZ, is that it's the compendium, or the work in the compendium and the documentation of land value capture, and especially kind of the questions around how it's used, is opening up opportunities to consider the extent to which land value capture can finance climate action and climate adaptation works. And so, and we're all three partners here and colleagues within the Institute are actually actively asking that question to see, is this not only, I mean, yes, it's a tool for financing urban development and so forth, but within that, to the extent that there are climate adaptation and climate action investments that need to be done to attend to climate change, is land value capture a potential tool? And so I think this is going to really help us ramp up that conversation. I want to go back. We have about a little over, just under 15 minutes, but I wanted to go back. Rudiger, was there another case or something that you wanted to bring up, or a reaction to what Barbara was adding to the conversation?
Yeah, I could quickly also mention another case, another lesson in a way that we've learned in the preparation of the compendium, that also in a way that it can be quite useful to use very different land value capture instruments to diversify the revenue streams and then reduce the risk that certain of them may not work for whatever political or legal reasons. and that the UK has demonstrated quite effectively in the financing of the Crossrail. And where really they have been using a lot of different ways and sources, ranging from direct funding to various betterment levies, property taxes, and developer contributions to basically fund the Crossrail. And obviously, what is important in that context is also to make sure that you're not kind of taxing people two or three times for the same thing. So obviously, you need to make sure that you're avoiding that. You're having rules in place that are preventing that, but otherwise that's quite important. And I also wanted to quickly react to something that Barbara has been saying, and I agree very much. I mean, in a way, when we're talking about building infrastructure, especially in cities, I mean, we're looking at the OECD countries. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be improved. I mean, needs to be kind of like, changed with the transition to net zero carbon and so on and so forth. But I mean, relatively speaking, compared to the need of infrastructure investments in the global south, I mean, that's much smaller basically, and therefore kind of like, I mean, the potential of land value capture to really make a huge difference, or whether kind of like, the cities in the global south several decades from now will be kind of like, environmentally sound, will be livable, will be just, and will be inclusive. I mean, that really land value capture can make a huge contribution to kind of like get things in the right way, and that cannot be overstated. I'm saying that coming from the OECD, where my focus in principle is rather on the the more developed OECD countries, but I think really I mean, a large part of that fight, in a way, I mean, that we need to do to get to net zero carbon and to kind of like make the world a better place more generally, is actually, I mean, happening in those areas of the world, and land value capture potentially can be a really important tool for that. But I mean, obviously, I mean, there's certain constraints, but I mean, the potential is there, and it just needs to be used. I just wanted to make that point.
Oh, thank you very much. And this is great. We have a list of questions that have come in. Thank you so much, everyone, for sending in your questions. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get to all of them. So I'm going to just jump in and pick, excuse me for scrolling here, but a question to both to Barbara and Rudiger. And this is a bit long, so excuse me for reading this. Land value capture has definitely a great potential to generate funds for reinforcing the local capacity to provide urban infrastructure and social housing, but it's seldom discussed other relevant virtues of land value capture that is a contribution to improve the functioning of urban land markets, as it impacts expectations on landowners regarding land value privatization, thus reducing speculation. It also provides more transparency in land use management. These are all very relevant contributions for better urban, in parentheses, land planning. So the question is to OECD and GIZ, are these concerns or additional concerns or potentials for land value capture in your work?
Yes, if I may, yes, of course. And I think, speaking from my own experience as an urban planner, we normally learn to handle the territory thinking of urban silhouettes, on aesthetical things. We talk about how many stores we will have in a building, or an access and urban places, these kind of things. But what we don't learn is to translate it into the value of the country. So we don't connect the transformation, the physical transformation of the territory with markets. That is something that we as urbanists normally don't learn. Afterwards, in the practical work, in our empirical work, we learn to deal with that, but not systematically. And this is a kind of a lack of transparency that is clear. And in general, when we worked in Quito, in the capital of Ecuador, trying to develop context-specific instruments for the capital, for the country, for the needs of that city and the potentials of the city, the first thing we had to do is to gather information, systematical information on the land markets, because we didn't have that. We had a cadastre, but we didn't have real information about what is happening on the land market. That is one thing. So data is really key, and understanding how this works is key. And it's not only a question for experts, it's a question for society, for the people who are using and working and living on this country, because everybody is in a kind of way a victim of speculation, but also a small speculator. Everybody speculates with land value because it's part of our strategies, surviving strategies in the global south. So it's necessary to and I think that's what I learned also on this kind of instruments, that the first thing they do is transparency, bringing into transparency into the thing. The other point, what we were talking yesterday with a colleague from Mexico, is the question of corruption, and the question of everybody is already, or many, they are already paying for that, but they are not doing it in a transparent way, and this money doesn't go into a public benefit. So there is a huge, I think this question of transparency is a question of governance. It's not only a question of functioning of functionality of the land market. That's right. That's also an effect, an impact, a necessary impact, but it has a lot to do with governance, with justice, and with broaden the possibilities for all in the city, for everybody in the city, to achieve a better life. Very important issue what was mentioned there.
Thank you, Rudiger.
Yeah, I agree with all that has been said by Martin and Barbara. I just would like to add one aspect, which is maybe even more basic, which is, I mean, if you want to do land value capture, I mean, you obviously need to know, I mean, who owns what. You need to know who is whose house this is, or whose apartment that is, or whose land that is, that you want to tax, basically. And therefore it also means you need to kind of like, I mean, improve your catasters. I mean, you need to kind of like clarify your property rights. And that has additional benefits, because it kind of like, I mean, gives just people more certainty that they actually, if there's, somebody else is coming and saying, look, I mean, this is my flat, get out, that they can actually make the claim and show that it really is theirs. So basically this fundamental need of, I mean, clarifying property rights, building cadasters, or kind of like similar instruments is of extremely high value, both for the well-being of the people who are living there, but then also kind of like, I mean, for making improvements, because I mean, if you're having more secure property rights, you're more willing to invest in the quality of your building, rather than if you're fearing it's going to be taken away, which in a way you may even give you incentives to make it look really, really shabby, because and then you hope that nobody wants it, basically. So I mean, this is a really very important aspect. I mean, that cannot be overlooked, and that also is really fundamental. Yes.
Great, thank you both. I think I'm going to drop a bomb of a question here from another, so really quickly, but just to put it out there, in part because it is is always involved in the debate, both in support of land value capture and in a critique of the tool and the approach. And the question comes might it be possible that we can elaborate a bit more on the social justice aspects captured in the compendium, and are there some key points or learnings which can be already shared on the from that perspective? So social justice, I would venture to say that the equity question that I had said before, that it was one of the things that we wanted to consider. Quickly, some thoughts. I
mean, how shall I say? I mean, the better your land value capture tools are thought out, I mean, the more they will do for social justice, because what they're doing is, I mean, they're taking windfalls that are going to people who don't deserve them towards public use, basically. Now, moreover, typically when you're talking about land or houses, I mean, the housing wealth or the land wealth is not, is not, I mean, linear in the population. So I mean, typically richer people are owning a lot more of that stuff. So basically, I mean, when this is well designed, I mean, you also have a redistributive effect on top of all the other aspects that we've been mentioning. And in a way, what you're avoiding also is kind of like, I mean, that you are for example, when you're building a metro system or some kind of like transport, and you're improving, I mean, the values of all the housing in the areas go up. I mean, what you're doing is you're making a really huge distribution towards the most rich people in your countries, which is typically not what governments are trying to do. So in that aspect, I mean, land value capture in itself is incredibly important. Now, there's obviously also the aspect is what you do with the money. Now, we're not capturing that in the compendium, and that obviously has also a large impact on how helpful for social justice, I mean, land value capture can be. I mean, in the extreme, if you take all the money and then you, I mean, either, I mean, it is stolen, or it is kind of like, used for purposes that only helping very few people, then obviously, I mean, the social justice effect is much diminished. But I mean, the idea is that this is spent in a way where it helps creating infrastructure that benefits a large number of people. And in that sense, it should be really helping in making societies and cities more inclusive.
Thank you, Barbara.
I would say that this impact in terms of social justice is not automatically guaranteed. I think these instruments need to be embedded in a clear vision of what kind of urban development or what kind of city we want to have, we want to achieve. And so it needs something like a joint construction of a vision, and it needs accountability and transparency in how it is implemented, because we know many examples where these kind of instruments were implemented in a way that maybe you had sectoral benefits, for instance, an improved public transport system financed by these kind of instruments, but on the other hand, an impact in terms of gentrification or urban sprawl. So there can be in a certain way also conflicting goals between financial efficiency and revenues that you want to achieve on one hand, and social justice and a sustainable urban development and environmental sustainability on the other hand. So it's not necessarily so that these instruments automatically ensure that all these goals will be achieved in the same way. So I think it needs really a strong I don't know, governance structure, or yes, as I said, embedded in this vision, and also in accountability and transparency in systems that ensure transparency and accountability. So to ensure that they are really used in that way. So it's not automatically given that this redistributive impact of these instruments. So maybe a bit more critical.
Yeah, no, great. No, thank you so much. And these are very important conversations that get to how do we even open up the conversation, promote it, and anticipate these types of questions. And again, as Rudiger was mentioning, the equity, there's an equity component embedded in the concept itself. But as Barbara is saying, that the larger social equity vision and social justice thing is we need to really question and look at our own the urban visions, the plans. I'm a planner, so we need to think about that tool as, that's the starting point to see where the redistribution is or isn't happening, and then how the tool is used. This has been a wonderful dialogue conversation. Thank you so much. We're at time. Rudiger, thank you so much. From the OECD, Barbara from GIZ, thank you so much. Thank you for the audience for joining us and staying with us for the hour. Happy birthday to the Lincoln Institute. And we will let you know when the next dialogue is. Have a good afternoon, a good evening, a good rest of the day for those of you that are starting your day. And again, a heartfelt welcome, thank you, to both Barbara and Rudiger. And we'll be seeing you soon. And please check out the resources in all three institutions and organizations on this topic. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, Enrique.